that day. From that I will start. So I have not erased what I had written on that day. I have kept that so that we can start it from there itself. Now, what we were discussing that day is a Lacustrine system. And what I said that first I discussed there are two major types of lakes. One is a open lake, another is a closed lake. An open lake that has a stable coastline because there the precipitation and riverine inflow, these two balances the outflow, that is the evaporation. So that's why there is a stable coastline, whereas a closed lake, it has a shrinking coastline because the evaporation always they overpower the precipitation and riverine inflow. So there is a fundamental difference between an open lake and a closed lake. The open lake is mostly, they are open lake, they mostly are plastic in nature. So I discussed open lake is plastic in nature, whereas the closed lakes, they are more chemical in nature. We will discuss the sedimentation pattern. Then I said that the another classification of the lake, that is basically the stratified lake and overturned lake, and I was discussing the model of a stratified lake. Now, what is a stratified lake? Where you have a development of a thermocline. This is where is the thermocline. Thermocline, it is a temperature boundary. It is a temperature boundary, and what is happening? The surface layer, it is interacting with the atmosphere, and because of the air that is coming in contact with it, it is always energized and it becomes oxic. It becomes oxic. Okay. Now, this is oxic. Now, this oxygen pressure, it decreases up to certain depth within the lake, and below that you get the hypolimnion. Now, what is hypolimnion? Where the aerobic bacteria, so whatever the aerobic bacteria, they actually consume whatever the small amount of oxygen that is available in the deeper part, that this aerobic bacteria will consume and make an anoxic condition in the deeper part. Now, this stratified lake condition, that is very, very good for the lake to become a hydrocarbon source rock. The reason is that the surface layer is oxic, and that gives a immense help for the organic proliferation. And there is always a large amount of organic productivity in the surface layer. But the thing is that when these organisms, they die and they cause the settlement, this cause the organisms which is proliferating in the surface layer, after their death, they are settling. Because it is an anoxic layer, the settled organic matter will not be oxidized because the underlying layer is anoxic. So what is happening? The surface layer is oxic. It is favoring a large amount of organic proliferation. But after their death and settlement, the environment, it is very, very suitable for not getting it oxidized. So it is not getting oxidized, that becomes a very good source rock because of the high organic matter that is preserved in the anoxic condition. Okay, so this is one of the good for the hydrocarbon source rock formation. The same is possible if your main, it depends. It can also be, suppose this kind of lake, it is formed in a floodplain, in a fluvial floodplain. Suppose it is formed in a fluvial floodplain. Now, what will happen? In a fluvial floodplain, the kind of organic matter that you will expect, and that is basically the vegetal organic matter. And if it is a vegetal organic matter with less amount of hydrogen within it, when the hydrocarbon source rock will be formed, when there is a high, what is the character of a hydrocarbon source? When the H by C ratio is high. if the H by C ratio in the organic matter is low, then what is it is? This is called humic organic matter, humic. And when H by C ratio is high, we call it sapropelic organic matter, sapropelic. Okay, so when H by C ratio high and O by C ratio low, that kind of organic matter we call it sapropelic. If H by C ratio is low and O by C ratio is high, we call it humic organic matter. Now, what is the difference between humic and sapropelic organic matter? Humic organic matter is essentially vegetal, that is from plant derivation, whereas the sapropelic organic matter, they are mostly algal and organic, mostly the algal and the different kind of the small organisms. That is zooplanktons. So what will happen if you have mostly the humic organic matter? In that case, it will be better to form the coal. Whereas if you have the more organic matter, that is sapropelic organic matter, in that case you get the better of the formation of the hydrocarbon source. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now coming on to the overturned lake. Now, what is overturned lake? Overturned lake is that where this stratification will not be formed. This stratification will be always disturbed, and there is no stratified layer. Or the entire water column, they get churned from the bottom to the top. So there is no oxygen pressure difference between the top and the bottom. So where I get the overturned lake, we get mostly the more tectonically active area, high rainfall area, mostly is a tropical lakes. Tropical lakes where there is a high rainfall. Then what will happen, that the rainfall is so high that the discharge within the lake is very high. So the lakes which are connected to active rivers, then what will happen if it is the active river? So during the monsoon, during the rainy season, the river, it has a high discharge, and with a high amount of sediment and discharge, it supply into the lake, and that can reach even up to the bottom of the lake because of the high sediment discharge and the high density of the water because of the high sediment concentration within the flow. And that basically destroys all the temperature structure of the lake and the entire lake. So I don't expect that a overturned lake can give me a good quality hydrocarbon source rock or a good quality coal. A overturned lake cannot give it, because in an overturned lake the surface water can reach up to the bottom, and so any organic matter that may be settling, it may be immediately oxidized. So mostly the overturned lake are highly plastic, and they are more sand rich in their product. Okay. Now, Actually, I kept this for a few days, so now it is difficult to erase. Aditi is there online, Aditi? Is Aditi online?
No, sir. She is not there.
Okay. Anyway.
Sir, you can use some sanitizers.
Yeah, I can. I have to go again there. Yes, it's a good advice. Is the figure completely visible? Both the figures?
No, sir.
Sir, the lower one is not visible.
Lower one. So first you draw the upper one, then I will make the. I believe now the lower one will be visible.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So both are visible or not?
No, sir. Now the upper one is not
Huh.
very
So first you draw the upper one.
So what is written on the right corner? Small.
Small waves, low pitch. Then air stress, and that is causing the smaller scale waves on the surface of the lake water. Okay, smaller scale waves. This is the direction of input. Any river system that is actually is meeting the lake from that side. You just
What
draw.
on
Huh?
left side?
Hello.
What on left side?
Left side is balance between precipitation plus river flow and plus minus evaporation. So how the lake surface water that will move up or down, that depend upon this balance.
Okay, sir.
Any other thing? So if the top figure is drawn, then I can change the computer so that you can see the lower figure.
Yes.
Okay. Now lower figure is seen.
Yes, sir.
Please let me know when your drawing is complete.
It's done, sir.
Okay. So let me now describe the figures. First of all, as you can see from the upper figure, that there is no tidal action in the lake, as I discussed earlier also, because it is a sun, moon, earth combined force, and that lake cannot come in consonance into it. It is an open ocean that come in consonance in it, but lake, it is entirely a continent confined, and it is not an open system, so it cannot come in consonance with it. So mostly the energy that a lake gets, that is by the airflow on it, and the waves generated in the wave are of small size and of small fetch. So the energy which lake actually receives from the airflow, that very quickly dissipates because the energy is not very high because wave size is low. So it very quickly dissipates, and often a thermocline in a stratified lake, a thermocline is formed. But if the lake, it receives the sediment from a riverine inflow, that I have marked it as an input, riverine inflow, then I can have in a lake some surface inflow, some interflow and underflow, depending on the relative density of the lake water and the water that is supplied by the river system. What I am saying, depending on the relative density of the lake water and the water that is supplied by the river system, I can have a surface flow, a interflow or a underflow. If the supplied water is of higher density, then that it makes a underflow. If the supplied water is almost of same density, then it forms the interflow, and the supplied water is of less density, then it will float on the lake water and it will form the surface flow. Okay, so there are different kind of, but one thing is clear, that this is the supply point, and as you go away from the supply point, you will get the fining of the grain size in a lake. That what is shown in the lower figure, that from the input point you have the sandstone, which may be in the form of a small scale delta as well, the sandstone, and as you go away, the sand percentage decreases and the mud percentage increases, and you get the laminated sand shell, then laminated shell and massive shell. This is the general distribution of the facies type when you get to this kind of setting. But when the lake, it becomes a chemical lake, there is not much, then you have a biologic production. Actually in this model, the both open and closed lake, that together it has been shown. In case of a open lake or in case of a overturned lake, in case of a lake which is getting the active supply, in that case the biogenic production, that will be very, very less. It will be mostly clastic, and this is the pattern. But if you have this supply is not very high, then there will be biogenic production, and that biogenic production, that will be settling to the bottom. So this is a general pattern of the lake. Is it okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now let us come to the chemical lake. Chemical lake. Now
The
there
biogenic production will be in the case of when input is not there.
not much, not high. Biogenic production, naturally, if you have a high plastic supply in a lake, that will make the lake water dirty. And that lake water dirty lake water, that will not allow much of sunlight to penetrate into the lake. And when the sunlight is not penetrating, then the phytoplankton production becomes heavily hindered.
Okay, sir.
So biogenic production, normally what happens? Suppose you have an input from the right hand side, but that input is not so high that it can reach even up to the most left hand side. Suppose it depends upon the amount of input by the river system. A river system can give you a, suppose I am telling you one example. Suppose the river system, it only becomes active during the rainy season, and it doesn't become active into the winter season, because rainy season there is a huge discharge, and then at that time it supplies the cluster. And in the winter season, you really do not get any much supply. So in the winter season, when the lake is starved, that is promoting the biogenic production. But this summer, the monsoon season, there is a huge plastic supply. It is not favoring the biogenic production. So you can get a alternate sequence as well. Alternate sequence as well. Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
One example I am giving you. Suppose the Playa Lake. Playa Lake. What is a Playa Lake? It is normally we get in a desertic situation. Now, where from this lake gets its water? It gets water when there is some very occasional torrential rain in the desert. At that time, some kind of, I will also discuss during the Aeolian, that there are some small scale streamlets, they supply it in the local depression, the water body. That is a Playa Lake. Now, after this rain is over, then there is no supply to this, so the evaporites are formed. So you get the beautiful layer of the sand, clay, and evaporite. I'm just coming for 1 minute. Okay. So I similarly, we also get the lakes in a cold climate. Cold climate. So what we get in the cold climate, there is a very typical word called bharb. V-A-R-B, bharb. You must have heard this word, bharb.
Yes, sir.
So what is a bharb? It is a lacustrine sediment, and where there is a laminated sediment of fine, say centimeter to millimeter scale laminations of mud and silt. Now, how that is formed? It is formed during the seasonal. They are mostly seasonal because you have a winter season and a summer and monsoon season. So during the summer and monsoon, when there is a little rain and all this, the silts are supplied into the lake. And in the winter, when there is no supply, it is a cold condition, the only suspension sediment within the lake, that is the mud, that gets settled. So you get the alternate layers of the silt and mud, which are actually a seasonal. In case of a playa lake, this seasonal, that basically involves the carbonate shell and evaporite. So a carbonate shell evaporite, that is a bharb in case of a playa lake, but in a silt and shell, that is a bharb in case of a cold climate lake. So all these, they are basically the climatic signal that we get, and people work, lot of work people do the ancient paleoclimatic signal from the bharb deposit of different lakes. The cold climate lakes, they are the excellent archive for the understanding the past climate change, that how, at what scale the climates change, and then from that it is basically people try to project that what can be the future climatic condition. So there is a large number of people, they work on paleoclimatology based on this lake sediment, what they call the limnic sediment. Limnic lake sediment is called limnic, L-I-M-N-I-C, limnic sediment. So the bharbs are very good indicator that how the climatic condition, at what scale, what is the yearly cycle, what is the 10 years or 20 years, so different orders of cyclicity of the climate that can be very well picked up from the bharb deposit. Now I will end the lacustrine deposit discussion with the some discussion on the chemical lake. Now if we have a chemical lake, what are the major cations and anions I should expect in a chemical lake. Cations and anions. So the major cations they are sodium, calcium, and magnesium. These are the major cations: sodium, calcium, magnesium. These are the major cations in a lake sediment. And what are the major anions in a lake? Major anions in a lake. Major anions in the lake is chloride, carbonate, sulfate. So chloride, carbonate, and sulfate, they are the major anions in a lacustrine system. Now, first, let us first see that what is called the soda lake. What we call a soda lake. Now, a soda lake is that soda lake where you have a large amount of sodium and major anion, that is bicarbonate. Sodium and bicarbonate. And the typical evaporite minerals that we get, that is called natron or trona. That sodium and bicarbonate, they are called natron, trona. These are very typical of evaporite minerals in a lacustrine sediment. Extremely typical evaporite minerals in a, which we do not get in marine sediment. Okay. Now we can have a sulfate lake. In sulfate lake, what will be the major gypsum? Gypsum will be the major in case of a, and instead of sodium, calcium and magnesium will be the major cations there. In a sulfate lake, calcium and magnesium will be the major cation, and the major evaporite mineral, they will be gypsum. We also get the carbonate lake, and there you get the different kind of carbonates. There the freshwater carbonate that gets precipitated, and the calcium will be the major cation in the carbonate lake. Okay. Now, how we actually differentiate a shallow marine sediment from a lacustrine sediment? Shallow marine sediment in the rock record. How you can distinguish a lacustrine sediment and a shallow marine sediment? It is extremely difficult, in fact. Extremely difficult. It is not very easy. One major criteria that you should not expect any major tidal action in a lacustrine sediment, which we normally expect in a shallow marine sediment, the tidal imprint. The other measures I have discussed, some typical evaporites that we get in the lacustrine sediment, but it will only, you will get it in case of a closed lake or a chemical lake, not in a plastic lake, isn't it? Okay, so one major criteria that people use, particularly in phanerozoic setting, is the fossil content, because this is the freshwater system. So what we get, the fossils, what we get in case of a phanerozoic lacustrine system, this will not be applicable in case of the Picambian, where there is no life, where there is very little life. So in the phanerozoic system, you get the gastropod, bivalve, arthropod, So you basically get this, and you get the algae, cyanobacteria, cycadophytes. What is cycadophytes?
Excuse me, sir.
Eh,
सर बोर्ड पूरा दिख नहीं रहा है, थोड़ा स्क्रीन नीचे कर दीजिए.
Okay. Now,
Yes, sir. Visible.
so gastropod, bivalve, uh, arthropod, algae, cyanobacteria, cycadophytes. What is cycadophyte? Cycadophyte are the calcified stem, or spherical organic reproductive uh, parts. It is a calcified stem or spherical organic reproductive spore, pollen. Okay, so that it in the calcified manner you get, and that a common term used for it is cycadophytes, which are very common in a lacustrine sediment, but you may not get that much of plant derived stem, the organic spore, pollen, the calcified. You may not get that much in case of a marine system. Okay, you get the freshwater fossils. So these sometimes in some lakes only one kind of organism they only proliferate, only one kind of, there is not mixing of different kinds, then we call it monophytic association. Monophytic association. So what I intend to say here is the differentiation between a marine and a lacustrine sediment is not very easy, except that a lacustrine system will not show you any significant tidal action. The wave ripple sandstone, that is common both in marine and lacustrine, wave ripple. Now but large scale wave structure may not be visible. Number 3 is that it will be mostly showing the freshwater organic population such as gastropod, bivalve, arthropod, algae, cyanobacteria, and a large amount of the vegetal, continental vegetal material which are calcified, which are commonly known as cycadophytes. Is it okay?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. So with this, I am ending the lacustrine discussion. Now we will start the discussion on aeolian. Just one thing. Your metamorphic class is going on, na?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Who is taking? Professor Pant?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
So Anindita madam has stopped taking now.
Sir, she takes our practical classes.
Okay. So, and what about your total semester timetable? I just want to get myself refreshed. That semester will end at what time?
July.
In the end of
July? Till the end of July, we will have class. We will have class, na?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
So now aeolian. Now you know that aeolian, it means that the deposit formed by air. And what is the difference between the air and water? The first, both are fluid. Both are fluid. Okay? And you know the definition of fluid. What is the definition of fluid?
Property to flow.
I earlier I discussed this. A material,
It is a state of matter
Which cannot be shared.
which has ability
yeah,
to flow.
yeah, I told you repeatedly. It is a state of matter which cannot be sheared. Which cannot be sheared. Earlier also I discussed it. So now what is, both are fluid, but what is their major difference? And this difference actually put a role on the sediment carriage and the sediment movement. Water has a density that is 1000 kg per meter cube, whereas air has a density of 1.3 kg per meter cube. So it is a three order less density. This is water, this is air. Now you understand the difference between the two. Air is so light, and there is a huge density difference between the two. So if you have a density difference, you have a density difference between the two fluids, which fluid will require more velocity to carry sediment?
Water.
Hello? I could get you. Please. If one fluid has 1000 kg per meter cube density, another is 1.3 kg per meter cube, two fluid, both the fluid is trying to carry sediment. Which fluid will require higher velocity? It is a common sense. Why? Tell me.
Air need more.
Suppose you are standing. A thin person is trying to push you, and a fat person is trying to push you. Who require more momentum, thin or fat?
Okay.
तो क्यों कह रहे हो जो water requires higher velocity? Why you are telling that? A lighter medium trying to carry a sediment, isn't it require the higher momentum?
Yes, sir.
And then if
Yes.
it is a lower density, doesn't require the higher velocity? M into V.
Yes, sir.
So, is the logic clear?
Yes, sir.
Is it clear to everybody
Yes,
that
sir.
air requires much higher velocity to carry sediment? And that is the reason that have you ever seen that air is carrying the boulder, air is carrying the pebbles, cobbles, सब हवा में जा रहा है, pebbles, cobbles, boulder कभी देखे हो क्या?
No, sir.
हाँ, तो क्यों नहीं देखे हो? क्यों नहीं? इतना जोर से हवा बहते हैं. जब स्टॉर्म आते हैं, इतने जोर से हवा बहते हैं, पेबल बोल्डर को क्यों नहीं उड़ा लेते हैं? और पानी कैसे ले जाता है? हाउ वाटर इज कैरिंग इट, व्हाई एयर कैन नॉट कैरी? इट इज ऑल बिकॉज इट हैज ए मच लोअर डेंसिटी. Am I clear? And only sediment, only size that the air can carry, that is the fine sand, the coarse silt to fine sand. And if you go to any desert, you will see the large dunes that sand size is very, very fine sand, extremely fine sand. So much fine that if you put your hand into the desertic sand, it gets smeared into your hand. It gets smeared, and it gets so much closely smeared on your head, a hand, that you have to wash the hand to get rid of that fine grain size of sand. Am I clear, or have you any experience of that?
Yes, sir.
And why the air actually carries that grain size? Because with its density and the available velocity, it cannot carry a grain size coarser than that. And we must understand that what is the difference between the water carrying sediment and air carrying sediment. And why the air carrying sediment, they are so well sorted, and they are very they define a particular grain size. They define it. Normal water, strong wind. What is the velocity of a normally जो strong wind हम लोग जब कहते हैं strong wind, तो velocity क्या होती है strong wind का? हाँ?
More than 120 kilometers per hour.
More than 120 किलोमीटर पर आवर. अरे यार, ये जो साइक्लोन आ रहा है उसका ही होगा 40 to 55 किलोमीटर पर आवर. 120 किलोमीटर पर आवर तो राजधानी एक्सप्रेस मूव्स.
With the recent cyclone,
just see the YouTube and see that new cyclone is coming, Josh. What will be the velocity of Josh? 80 kilometer per hour, all trees will be down. 80 to 100. 120 is the Rajdhani Express, that is the speed. That also Rajdhani Express never goes in that speed. It only goes by 70, 80, 90. अरे ऐसा नहीं है. Normally क्या है कि a strong wind is 30 meter per second. That is what is a strong wind. And if you get 55 meter per second, that is when you call the hurricane or cyclone. ये सब ऐसा है ना, ये सब very easy questions for any interview to baffle you. Very easy. Now, in Earth, what is the major control of airflow? In Earth, what is the major control of airflow? The major control of airflow is actually the pressure difference, and temperature. These are the two major causes of airflow: pressure difference and temperature. Now we all know that low pressure zone form हो जाते हैं, low pressure zone, and then when low pressure zone forms, from the high pressure the air rushes into the low pressure zone. So any pressure difference that causes the air movement. Third major control on the air movement is temperature. Now what is the major control? That the equatorial zone on the surface of the earth, equatorial zone, that gets the maximum sun heat. The equators get maximum sun heat. And the poles get the minimum sun heat. It is because of the obliquity of the earth system. So the equator, it gets the maximum heat, and the equatorial air, because of its maximum heat and it becomes hot, it goes to the upper level of the atmosphere. It goes to the upper level. And the polar region that is cold, so it moves to the equator in the lower level. So the equatorial air, because of its high temperature, and it goes to the pole, to the upper layer of the atmosphere, and the polar air, which is cold and dense, it moves towards equator through the lower layer of the atmosphere. And this becomes a large-scale cell of the atmospheric circulation, very large-scale cell of atmospheric circulation. Now, within this large-scale cell of atmospheric circulation, there are divisions within each hemisphere. There are divisions in each hemisphere, which is because of the Coriolis force. Okay? So, if we draw it, this is equator. So, you have a zone here, you have a zone here, and this. This is equator. This and this, these are tropical, equatorial easterlies. Then these and these two, they are called tropical westerlies. This is polar high. This is polar high. You can see the figure.
Yes, sir.
So, what I have said, the equator, the air becomes very hot and it goes to upper layer. Pole, it is cold and it is the denser. So, from pole in the lower level, there is a movement towards equator, and in the upper level, there is a movement from equator to the pole. So, this is a broad scale. Now, within this broad scale, this gets divided into each hemisphere into separate scale because of the Coriolis force, because of the movement of the earth, the force which generates because of the movement of the earth, and we call it Coriolis force. Coriolis force. Now, this Coriolis force, basically dividing it into three subdivisions within each hemisphere. One is the equatorial easterlies, the tropical westerlies, and the polar easterlies and polar high. Now, this is a general pattern of the airflow. Okay? And what happens really, that there is a tropical easterlies and the hot water, and the temperate, there is westerlies. The hot water, hot air which goes up, and there are some rain shadow zone that forms between 10 degree latitude to 30 degree latitude. What I am saying, from 10 degree, maximum deserts, if you see, they are forming from 10 degree to 30 degree latitude. Why? Why? When we call something as a desert, what is a desert? What is a desert?
So the place which is getting less amount of rainfall.
The place which is getting less amount of rainfall,
Yes, what amount?
less around 50 maybe.
Hmm? Hmm? Less than 25 centimeter per year.
Centimeter per year.
Less than 25 centimeter per year. That is what is a desert. And for 25 to 50 is a semi-desertic. What is a arc? And what is a dune field? A arc is a hundreds of square kilometer area of desertic environment. That is what is the arc. And the smaller scale, less than, that is the 25 to 75 square kilometer area, and that is not beyond the 100 square kilometer area, then you call it a dune field. So dune field and arc, it is only the dimensional problem. Arc is a much larger scale than that of a dune field. Okay?
Okay, sir.
Okay. Now, what is the character of aeolian sediment? First, let us discuss that. One by one, let us discuss. What is the character of a aeolian sediment? The aeolian sediments, they are, as we know, they are always very well sorted. Number one, well sorted. Number two, fine sand to coarse silt. This is the size. Number three, there will be on that grain, you will get some signature of frosting or frosting or air impact. And number four, the grains will be very well rounded. Now, what happens really? How air carries the sediment? How air carries the sediment? What are the major process of the movement of grain in air? In air, we actually get bed load, saltation, a major process in aeolian, suspension. All three processes that operates in a aeolian system. But we get a huge contribution compared to a water system. In case of air system, the saltation takes a very major role. And a large amount of sediment that basically is moved by saltation. And the finer fraction of the sediment that remains in the suspension. Okay? Now, when there is a saltation or there is a movement of air, what happens really? Because water has a cushioning effect. Water has a cushioning effect on the particle that it moves, because water has a higher density. Air does not have that cushioning effect because of very low density. So one grain come in contact with the other grain and with high impact. So there will be always a high impact of one grain onto the other because there is no cushioning effect of the air because of its very low density. And that causes the impact of one grain on the other that actually splits the grain. These signatures of impact from one grain onto the other, that is very well picked up when the aeolian sediment, they are seen under scanning electron microscope. In scanning electron microscope, this impact of grains, which is basically carried in a alluvial, in a aeolian system, on one grain onto the other grain, that is very well visible. And those are people characterize those to identify that these are products of aeolian. Now, what are those we are causing called the air impact, the air impact. Now, what are the different products of a aeolian system? Number one, dune cross strata. Number two, interdune deposit. We will discuss what are these. We may get some ephemeral stream deposit, or in some case we also get the playa lake deposit. In cases we also get small scale fan deposit, which are also called sarir. So what are the different units of the aeolian deposit? Dune cross strata, interdune deposit, ephemeral stream deposit we can get at some occasional high rainfall. Then the ephemeral streams, they may generate and they carry the sediment. And if there is a playa lake, they can deliver the sediment within the playa lake as well. And you also can get the small scale fan systems which will generate during the high rainfall, and because of the non-cohesiveness of the aeolian sediment, the sediments can, like a fan or a surge, it can move. So they are called the sarir. Now, dune cross, first we start with the dune cross strata. Now there are different kinds of dune. There are different kinds of dune in aeolian system. We all have seen different Hindi film hero and heroine, they are dancing in the dune. And these dunes are the big dunes. They are very big dunes, and all dunes, as you know, they are basically product of lower Floridian. Whatever big the size is, they are all lower Floridian product, because it is not question of the size, but it is question of the velocity and depth of flow. Velocity and depth of flow. Now, dune, it can be linear, dunes, it can be linear, it can be cuspate, it can be barkhan, it can be star dune. All these are the different geometries of the dune. A star dune, it basically something like the star dune. A barkhan is the slip face. Okay, you get a linear dune. So there are different dune, and this dune basically that depends upon two parameters. One is sediment supply. What will be the geometry of a dune? It can be high, it can be low. A wind direction. This is variable, uniform. Depending on that, you can have a linear with the Barkhan. This is star. This is aspect. So depending on whether the sand supply is high or low and wind direction variable or uniform, the different kind of dunes. So you have a uniform high supply, then you get the wind direction, you get the Barkhan. But if you have a variable, but the supply is high, you get the linear. So likely there are different the sand supply and wind direction that basically controls the different geometry of the dune. Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But broadly, we can classify these all dunes. These are all questions of the different geometry of the dune. But if in terms of its morphology and genesis, if you see the dunes and their movement procedure, movement mechanism, and all these, the dunes, they are classified into number one, longitudinal dune and transverse dune. It is a mechanistical. You can classify all these dunes into longitudinal dune and transverse. What is a longitudinal dune? Where the dune axis is parallel to the water to the airflow. Dune axis is parallel to the airflow. What is transverse? Where the dune axis is perpendicular to the airflow. Am I clear? First, we will discuss the transverse dune and the product of transverse dune. Product of transverse dune. So suppose there is a dune and this is the dune crest and airflow is this. So the dune crest line is perpendicular to the airflow. Fine. Now, all of you, some of you must have gone to desert and seen the desertic dune. Any one of you have seen the desertic dune?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you must have seen that the entire desert that is totally filled of small scale ripple bed form, small scale ripple bed form. And even on a dune, you will be always getting the small scale ripples. They are always migrating because dune is a large and mostly it looks like a stationary unit. Though it often may not be stationary, but at any point of time dune can be stationary, may not be stationary. I am not saying that all dunes are not stationary. May be stationary, may not be stationary. But at any point of time, if I see a dune, it looks to me like that it is a stationary. But I can see a large number of ripples. They are actually on the surface of a dune. What these ripples do, that every day these ripples, they migrate with the airflow and it carries the sediment to the crest or the brink point, what we call the brink point. Crest or brink point of the dune. Okay? And when this continuous, for a long period of time, this continuous movement of the sand grain that goes on and it gets piled up here, and then there is a slope failure. This slope failure and it forms a kind of cross stratification. There is a slope failure, it forms a cross stratification. We call this sand flow cross strata. So what is happening? That these ripples, they are carrying sediment to the crest or B point of the large scale dune. And this goes on for day after day. At certain point of time, when the accumulation of sediment that crosses the angle of repose, this fades. And that sediment forms a cross strata which will be wedging downward, which will be wedging downward. And internally it will be reverse graded. Am I clear? Is there any confusion?
So is it a bed load or suspension load?
No, it is completely bed load. Completely, because the ripples, they are carrying the sediment here, and then it is a slope failure. The slope failure that is causing this cross stratification to be formed. This cross stratification is wedging downward, and they are actually a product of reverse flow or grain flow. The flow here is a grain flow. Grain flow. Yeah, are you clear? There is no suspension here.
Yes, sir. Okay.
Okay. Now, once this cross stratification is formed, then again the ripples have to take the sediment for days after days to pile up the sediment here. Okay? Because once it is released, then again the work of ripple starts, and it will take time to build up a sediment there. So before the next cross stratification will be formed, there will be a long lull time when there is the ripples are only carrying sediment, but the sand flow cross strata cannot be formed because that slope is not yet formed. In the meantime, whatever the sediment that is in the suspension within the air, that will be from suspension, it will be settled on this cross stratification. And this suspension settlement, that will form another cross strata above it, which will be wedging upward, wedging upward. This cross strata, which is actually the suspension settlement product, we call it sand fall cross strata. Sand fall. It's sand flow, a sand fall cross strata. So first sand flow, it is a product of grain flow, and sand fall is a product of suspension settlement. Okay? Is it clear? Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Now, this is going on, and in the meantime, these ripples are also carrying the sediment here. So again, a point will come when the slope will be crossed, and again a sand flow cross strata will be formed. Okay, then, so finally, what will be the, if I take a cross section here, the so this is a sand flow, this is a sand fall. This is again a sand flow, this is a sand fall. So they alternate with one another. The sand flow, it will be reverse graded. Sand fall, it will be normal graded because it is a suspension settlement. The grain size, the sand fall, it will be finer compared to sand flow. And this and the sand flow, it will be wedging downward, sandfall wedging upward. Is the figure visible to you?
Yes, sir.
So this is what is formed in case of a transverse aeolian bed form. Typical character of transverse aeolian bed form is sand flow and sandfall cross strata, one wedging downward, one wedging upward, one is internally reverse graded, another normal graded, and this is the character of the transverse bed form. Now, what will be the character of longitudinal bed form? So this is the mean airflow, and this is actually the longitudinal. Longitudinal bed forms are mostly stationary. Transverse bed forms are most cases mobile, whereas longitudinal bed forms are mostly stationary, and they are much larger scale than the transverse bed form. Longitudinal bed forms, they grow and remain stationary. The small scale longitudinal bed form, they are referred to as the SIF, SEIF. SIF is a small scale longitudinal bed form. Now what is happening here? The mean airflow is that, and the crest line of the bed form, they are parallel to the, that's why it is called longitudinal. Now, how these bed form grow? It doesn't grow as I discussed the transverse bed form. It doesn't happen like that. What happens really, that this is the mean airflow, but the air within this air actually deviates about 45 to 50 degrees. This is the mean flow direction, but the air direction that basically deviates about 45 to 50 degrees. What happens really, that when this flow happens, so there are the ripples that is moving on this surface of the bed. And when this flow happens, the ripples forming on this surface. And these two different sets of ripples, they basically cross from the intersecting layer. So this is this, this is this is this, this is. This is how it is a accretionary bed form by means of the movement of the ripples on the two surface of the bed form and gradual upward and sideward growth. So it will grow upwards as well as sidewards, and more accretion of ripple layer that will take place on its surface. There is no avalanching, there is no slope failure, nothing, because the gradient of this surface is much low. And on that the ripples move and they actually deposit their unit, and the bed form grows in size by means of the gradual aggradation and accretion of the ripple layers on the surface. Is it clear? You can understand the two different types. A transverse bed form, which is a migratory, there you are getting sand flow, sandfall cross strata. A longitudinal bed form, which is stationary, that is essentially the aggradational bed form, and there is the growth of the bed form both vertically and sidewise by means of accretion of the ripple layers on the surface of the bed form. Okay. Then we will discuss the, you have a class after this.
No, sir.
So I can spill over 5-10 minutes, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
So longitudinal and trend. Now interdune deposit. Interdune deposit. Now what is interdune deposit? If you see that there is a dune and there is another dune. So in between the dunes is the interdune. And in the interdune, what really is happening? There are trains of ripples. Trains of ripples. They are basically filling the space between the two dunes. Trains of ripples. And these ripples, they are basically moving, and they basically form a deposit which is called subcritically climbing translatant strata. What we call it? Subcritically climbing translatant strata. What is, I earlier discussed that what is a subcritical climbing, critical climbing, and supercritical climbing. We all discussed this thing. Here it is subcritical climbing, translatant strata. It is a typical product of interdune ripple migration. Interdune ripple migration. How it looks like? It is a very low gradient strata, very low gradient strata. Within that, here and there, you may get 1-2 cross stratification. So this is actually product of and the low angle migration of these ripples at the interdune, and there is a suspension settlement, so they basically subcritically climb. And the nature of this strata is very low angle, about 5 to 7 degree will be the gradient from the horizontal. Very low angle, the ripple cross stratification, where the ripple cross strata is not very easily, require a very trained eye in the field to identify this product. Very trained eye. And we call it subcritically climbing translatant strata. So, what you will get? You will get this cross stratification, and with this cross stratification, there will be the wedging of this This is how the cross stratification and the dune and interdune, they alternate with one another. Dune and interdune, they alternate with one another. Okay, fine. So we have discussed the dune cross strata, the interdune deposit. Then you have the ephemeral stream. Now ephemeral stream, as I discussed earlier, that they form during the occasional high rainfall and occasional high precipitation, because the aeolian sediment, they are non-cohesive. There is very little mud, so they are non-cohesive, very non-cohesive, and the grain size is very well sorted, well rounded, and then you supply water into it. So what will happen, that the grain concentration is very high, and they get water, they then start moving like a slurry. They move like a slurry, and that sometimes they move like a slurry, or sometimes they move like some very shallow ephemeral stream that moves, and if there is a lake, that gets drained into the lake. Okay, and this is either in the form of some kind of mass flow such as grain flow, or it is some kind of a channel flow, which is a cross-stratified sandstone you get out of it. Now, if a aeolian field, it can be sandy, it can be rocky as well. It can be rocky. If there is a rocky, in that case you do not get much of sand on it. The aeolian field, it is acting on a rocky surface. We call those surfaces as deflation surface. Sometimes we also call it reg. Deflation. What is a deflation surface? A deflation surface is a rocky surface or it is a bouldery surface which aeolian system has reworked but could not carry. Reworked but could not carry. So it has left behind. It has left behind. When it has left behind, then you call it a reg. That means it's a huge span of land which is basically now covered by pebble, cobble, boulder. That is strewn over the entire surface. That means the air has acted and it has left. It has not carried those and carried only that fine-grained sediment which it can carry. वो लेके चला गया, left, it has left out. We call them reg. If it is a rocky, we call it deflation surface. Is it okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, we end this aeolian discussion with a succession of aeolian, that how really the aeolian forms a succession. Now this is a attempt to show you the general succession of a aeolian, and it is actually a interbedding between a dune and interdune deposit. Dune and interdune. In between, you can have a small scale fans if it's high precipitation and form of a fan, what we call the wadi fan. Wadi fan. And as I have shown you a nearly equal distribution of dune and interdune, it may not be. It may not be. What will be the distribution of dune and interdune? it all depends upon the relative position of the water table. If the water table is low, in that case, the surface sediment will be more dry. If the water table is low, the surface sediment will be dry and there will be more possibility for the air to act on it because it is a dry and the very easy to carry the sediment from there. In contrast, if you have a high water table, then the surface become moist and damp. High water table, the surface become moist and damp. So it is not very easy for air to take the sediment and form large dune. In that case, the small scale bed formed and the interdune deposit, they will be dominating. So whether the dune cross strata will dominate or the interdune, the ripple laminations will dominate, that will be fully depending on what is the relative position of the water table in that place. If it is not clear, please ask me question, then I can tell you.
Sir, repeat
Whatever the drawing that I have done, there I have tried to show you the dune and interdune. Dune is large scale cross strata, the meter scale thick cross strata set. The large scale dune, they are amalgamated meter scale cross stratified unit, they are dune cross strata. And the interdune, they are basically the subcritically climbing translated strata with some ripple lamination. The figure I have drawn, there I have shown you that how dune and interdune, they intercalate with one another and form the succession, except when there is a high precipitation and formation of a fan-like structure, what we call the wadi fan. Now, this uniform distribution of dune and interdune, it may not be a reality in all the cases. In many cases, you can see the succession is dune dominated or interdune dominated. Now, what controls this dune domination and interdune domination? I am saying it is the water table at that place that basically control that whether dune will dominate or interdune will dominate. If the water table is low, then surface sediment becomes very dry, and any dry sediment, that is as such, the aeolian sediment doesn't have mud, so non-cohesive and dry, very easy for the air to work on it and take that sediment and form large scale dune. Whereas if the water table is high, then the surface become damp and surface become moist, and any moist surface, it is difficult for the air with its density and velocity to take away the sediment in a large scale. So in that case, the ripples are more favored and interdune deposit will be more favored. So more you get that, you all know what we tell, that to stop the advancement of the desert, do more plantation. Now, why we talk about plantation? That any plant that will draw the water table near to the surface, the roots of the plant will draw the water near to the surface. And if the water is drawn near to the surface, then the surface becomes moist, surface becomes damp, and it becomes difficult for the air to act on it. So you stop the advancement of the desert by means of plantation. So like that, I am saying that the water table plays a major role for the relative dominance of the dune and the interdune laminations in the succession. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. So this is more or less the aeolian, and if you see the aeolian, once we get this succession, then I just end my discussion with one topic, that is the different order of surfaces in a aeolian product. If you see the aeolian, suppose this is a aeolian, so you get so any aeolian, there is a hugely cross-stratified sand. Aeolian product means they are heavily cross-stratified sand. Now, if you see the cross-stratification, there are different order of surfaces that basically constitute this cross-stratified sand. So, if we start with, this is the main surface which define the boundary of the aeolian. So, if this is first order, then this said boundary is there second, or this is the surface which basically bound this dune unit. This is another dune unit. So, this is the second order. Then this becomes the third order. This cross stratification becomes fourth order. This is how we basically classify the different order of surfaces in the aeolian product. The ordering of surfaces in a aeolian product. That ordering of surfaces depending upon the genesis, that how the, suppose the dune interdune boundary, that order is definitely the lower order than a dune set boundary, because that is more easy to change than the environmental boundary. So dune interdune, two different environment, but within the dune, two different cross stratification set, they are product of the same environment. So like that, we differentiate the different surfaces and assign the importance and genesis to the different surfaces to understand the whole development of the aeolian system in a better perspective. This is what is order of surface. Order of surface. This ordering of surfaces help us in identifying that what is a product of a dune, what is a product of interdune, how these dune and interdune, they are interrelated to one another, and they are bounded by different order of surfaces. Am I clear? Is it clear? There may be some confusion here, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Yes, sir. Not clear.
मैं ये कह रहा हूँ simplistically, I am telling you very simplistically, don't go by very high-fi thing. I am saying I am seeing a aeolian sandstone, and the sandstone is cross-stratified sandstone, is a huge succession of aeolian, huge succession of aeolian. Now, how we do the study of that succession? How we high resolution we can describe the succession? So first, what we do, we try to define the, suppose I have a aeolian, you have a aeolian, this is a aeolian system, and it is coming over a marine system. नीचे marine system है, or it can be a lacustrine system. इसके ऊपर I am getting a aeolian sandstone. Now I want to characterize this aeolian sandstone. How we do that? How we do that? We first, इसमें I may get the dune product, I may get the interdune product. The dunes can be of different scale. Then the dune, interdune, they may be alternating at different orders and surfaces. How we do that? We do that by means of, first we start it by identifying different order of surfaces. And the numbering of the ordering, that is the most regional to most local. The most regional surface will be the lower number, and if you go to more local surface, that is more higher number. So here the contact between a lacustrine and aeolian, that is the first order, because it is a total environment change. Total environment change, I give it the most highest importance, that is the first order. And then above this aeolian, I can again get a marine sediment. So this above environment and the lower environment, it is the most important for us because it is an environment change. Now within environment change, after this environment change, I come within the aeolian. Within aeolian, there may be product of one dune, product of dune complex, product of dune and interdune, all these different units. So what then I identify this surface. This surface, what it is? It is not bounded within one cross set. It is cut across the multiple sets. So it comes into the next category, that is the second, because it is actually the separation boundary between two different dune complex. So I am giving you the next importance. Then I am giving you the third. What is that? Is the said boundary of the dunes that we. So once I differentiate between the dune complex, then I come in within the individual dune complex. Individual dune complex, one set, that is the set boundary, that is product of a single dune. So then it is the third order. And then the cross stratifications within the dune, they are the next order of surface, which is product of a individual dune. So that is the fourth order. So I am just giving you an example that how really we identify the surfaces and the significance of the surfaces in the entire genesis of the Aeolian product. Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
You read any book, and then if you have any specific problem, ask me. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So we end our class here, and I thought that I will also cover the glacial today, but ho nahi paya. So next Thursday we will do the we start with the glacial, and then we will enter into the shallow marine. Continental will be ending, and then the shallow we will start the shallow marine. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.